The sound of a woman weeping cut through the twilight air like a knife through butter, and Garrett Young stopped his horse dead in its tracks along the dusty trail that ran parallel to the Rio Grande. It was late September in 1878, and the Texas heat still clung to the evening like a stubborn memory, but something about those sobs made his blood run cold. He had been riding for 3 days straight from a cattle drive that had taken him clear up to Dodge City, and all he wanted was a hot meal and a soft bed in Jefferson, but his conscience would not let him ignore the sound of someone in distress. He dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud that barely disturbed the crickets beginning their nightly chorus. The weeping grew louder as he approached the riverbank, and there, sitting on a flat rock with her knees drawn up to her chest, was a young woman in a torn blue dress. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and hung in tangled waves around her shoulders, and even in the fading light, Garrett could see that her face was streaked with tears and dirt. "Madam," he called out softly, not wanting to startle her, "are you hurt?" She looked up at him with eyes so full of pain and fear that it took his breath away. They were green, he noticed, the color of new grass after a spring rain, and they were rimmed with red from crying. She could not have been more than 22 or 23 years old, and despite the disheveled state of her appearance, there was something refined about her features that spoke of a genteel upbringing. "Please," she said, her voice hoarse and trembling, "please do not hurt me." "I have nothing left to take." Garrett held up his hand slowly, showing her that he meant no harm. "I am not here to hurt you, madam. I heard you crying and wanted to make sure you were all right. My name is Garrett Young, and I am just a cowboy trying to get home to Jefferson after a long drive." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face as if trying to determine whether he was telling the truth. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because some of the tension left her shoulders, though she still looked ready to bolt at the slightest provocation. "I am Katherine Walsh," she said quietly, "and I am very far from all right." Garrett noticed then that she was shivering, though the evening was still warm. Shock, he thought, or perhaps fear had gotten into her bones. Without thinking twice, he shrugged out of his coat, the worn leather jacket that had seen him through countless nights on the trail, and held it out to her. "Here," he said gently, "you are shaking something fierce. Put this on." Katherine stared at the coat as if it were some exotic object she had never seen before. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it from him, wrapping it around her shoulders. It was far too large for her, but Garrett could see the way she pulled it tight around herself, seeking whatever warmth and comfort it could provide. "Thank you," she whispered, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Garrett felt something twist in his chest at the sight. He had seen plenty of suffering in his 30 years of life, both during his service in the latter days of the war as a young man and in the hard years that followed, but there was something about this woman's grief that struck him deeply. "What happened?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. "How did you come to be out here all alone?" Katherine wrapped his coat tighter around herself and looked out at the river, which was running low and sluggish in the dry season. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, and Garrett had to strain to hear her over the sound of the water. "My father died 6 months ago," she began, her words coming slowly as if each one cost her something. "He was a merchant in San Antonio, and we had a good life there. But when he passed, I discovered that he had debts I knew nothing about. Everything we owned was sold to pay what he owed, and I was left with nothing. A man named Vernon Cates, who ran a saloon in San Antonio, offered me work and a place to stay. I was desperate, and I thought he was being kind." She paused, and Garrett saw her hands clench into fists in the fabric of his coat. He had a sinking feeling he knew where this story was going, and anger began to build in his gut. He was not kind, Katherine continued, her voice hardening. He wanted me to work upstairs, entertaining men for money. When I refused, he said I owed him for the room and board he had given me, and he would not let me leave until I paid him back. He locked me in a room at night and watched me during the day. But yesterday he got drunk and forgot to lock the door properly. I ran. Did he hurt you? Garrett asked, though part of him was not sure he wanted to know the answer. Not in the way you are thinking, Katherine said, meeting his eyes. But he would have given time, I know that now. I took nothing but the dress I was wearing and ran into the night. I have been walking for nearly 2 days, following the river and hiding when I saw anyone coming. I thought if I could just get far enough away, I could find honest work somewhere, start over. But I have no money, no references, and no one who would vouch for me. I have nothing. The last word came out as a sob, and she buried her face in her hands. Garrett crouched down so he was at her eye level, though he kept a respectful distance. His mind was racing, turning over possibilities and plans. He could not just leave her here, that much was certain. Vernon Cates sounded like the kind of man who would come looking for what he considered his property, and even if he did not, a woman alone in this country faced dangers that did not bear thinking about. Katherine, he said, and she looked up at the sound of her name. I live in Jefferson, about 10 miles north of here. It is a good town, growing fast since the railroad came through. There are respectable establishments there that would hire a woman of good character. I give you my word as a gentleman that I will see you safely there and help you find honest work. You are not alone anymore. She stared at him as if he had just offered her the moon. Why would you do that for a stranger? What do you want from me? Nothing, Garrett said firmly. My mother raised me to help those in need, and she would take a switch to me even now if she knew I left a lady in distress by the riverside. I am not Vernon Cates, and I am not any man who would take advantage of a woman in your situation. I am just someone who happened to be riding by at the right time. Katherine searched his face again, and this time when she looked at him, something in her expression softened. You have kind eyes, she said quietly. My father used to say you could tell a man's character by his eyes. I think he would have liked you. Garrett felt his ears grow warm at the compliment, though he tried not to show it. Can you ride? My horse is strong enough to carry us both, and we can be in Jefferson before midnight if we leave now. She nodded and allowed him to help her to her feet. Up close, he realized she was taller than he had first thought, coming up nearly to his shoulder. She swayed slightly when she stood, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. When did you last eat? He asked, frowning. I had some berries yesterday morning, she admitted. I was afraid to stop anywhere to ask for food. Garrett muttered a curse under his breath and led her back to where his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Rusty, was waiting patiently. From his saddlebag, he pulled out some jerky and a canteen of water. It is not much, he said, handing them to her, but it will help until we can get you a proper meal. Katherine took the offered food with trembling hands and ate slowly, as if she had to remind herself how to do it. Garrett busied himself checking Rusty's tack, giving her privacy to collect herself. When she had finished, she looked a little steadier, and some color had returned to her pale cheeks. He helped her mount first, then swung up behind her. Katherine went rigid at first, clearly uncomfortable with the close contact, but Garrett kept his touch light and respectful, only placing his arms around her to reach the reins. I will not let you fall, he promised, and felt some of the tension leave her body. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the rhythmic clop of Rusty's hooves and the occasional call of a night bird. The stars were coming out overhead, scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. Garrett found himself intensely aware of the woman in front of him, The way her hair smelled faintly of lavender despite her ordeal, the delicate bones of her shoulders visible through his coat and her thin dress. "Tell me about Jefferson," Katherine said after a while, breaking the silence. "What kind of town is it?" Garrett was grateful for the question, as it gave him something to focus on besides the unexpected feeling stirring in his chest. "It is a good town," he said. "We have got about 2,000 people now, maybe more. The railroad came through 5 years ago, and that brought a lot of business. We have got proper stores, a bank, a school, 3 churches, and a newspaper. There is a hotel called the Excelsior House that is run by a fine woman named Mrs. Potter. She might have worked for you, or at least know someone who does." "It sounds like a real town," Katherine said, and he could hear the hope in her voice. "I have been in places that were little more than a collection of tents and false front buildings." "Jefferson is solid," Garrett assured her. "Built to last. I have lived there for 8 years now, ever since I mustered out and decided I had seen enough of drifting. I work as a ranch hand for the Double Y spread just outside town, and I have got a small cabin on the property. It is not much, but it is mine, and it is honest work." "That sounds like a good life," Katherine said softly. "Simple and honest. I think I would like something like that." They talked more as they rode, the conversation flowing easier than Garrett would have expected given the circumstances. Katherine told him about growing up in San Antonio, about her mother who had died when she was young, about the books she loved to read and the way she used to help her father in his store, keeping the ledgers and dealing with customers. Garrett found himself captivated by the sound of her voice, the intelligence and humor that came through even though she had been through hell. In turn, he told her about his family, about his mother who had passed 3 years ago and his sister who lived in Houston with her husband and 4 children. He told her about the cattle drives and the satisfaction of working with his hands, about the beauty of the Texas landscape that had gotten into his blood and would not let him go. By the time they reached Jefferson, the church bells were chiming 11, and most of the town was dark and quiet. Garrett guided Rusty down the main street, past the courthouse and the newspaper office, until they reached the Excelsior House. Light still showed in a few of the windows, and Garrett knew from experience that Mrs. Potter kept late hours. He helped Katherine down from the horse, noting with concern that she swayed on her feet. The ride and the events of the past 2 days were clearly taking their toll. Supporting her with one arm, he tied Rusty to the hitching post and then guided her up the steps to the hotel's front door. Mrs. Potter herself answered his knock, a robust woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an air of no-nonsense competence. Those sharp eyes took in Katherine's disheveled appearance and Garrett's coat around her shoulders in an instant. "Garrett Young," she said, her tone somewhere between disapproving and curious. "It is nearly midnight. What brings you to my door with a young lady in such a state? Mrs. Potter, this is Miss Katherine Walsh. She has had some trouble and needs a safe place to stay. I was hoping you might have a room available, and perhaps some work if she is looking to settle in Jefferson." Mrs. Potter's expression softened as she looked at Katherine, and Garrett saw recognition flash in her eyes. She had helped women in difficult situations before, he knew, and she had a reputation for being fair and protective of those under her roof. "Come in, both of you," she said, stepping back to let them enter. The hotel lobby was warm and welcoming with polished wood floors and comfortable furniture. "Miss Walsh, you look dead on your feet. When did you last have a proper meal or a bath?" "I cannot remember," Katherine admitted, and Garrett saw tears threaten again. "Mrs. Potter, I must be honest with you. I have no money to pay for a room. Mr. Young was kind enough to bring me here, but I cannot impose on his charity or yours. If you know of any work I could do, I am willing to do anything honest to earn my keep." "Hush now, Mrs. Potter said gently, leading Katherine to a chair. "We will sort out the details tomorrow. Tonight you need food, a bath, and rest. Garrett, you go on home. I will take care of Miss Walsh." But Katherine reached out and caught Garrett's hand before he could leave, her green eyes wide and pleading. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for stopping. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your coat and your kindness. I will never forget what you did for me tonight." Garrett felt something shift in his chest, something that felt dangerous and exhilarating all at once. "You are welcome, Katherine. I will come by tomorrow to check on you if that is all right," she nodded, still holding his hand. "I would like that very much, Mrs. Potter shooed him out a moment later, and Garrett found himself standing on the hotel's front porch, feeling oddly bereft without Katherine's presence. He touched the place on his hand where she had held it, still feeling the warmth of her fingers. He rode back to the Double Y in a daze, barely noticing the familiar landmarks. When he finally reached his cabin and settled Rusty in the small corral behind it, he realized he was smiling like a fool. He had only known Katherine Walsh for a few hours, but something told him his life had just changed in a fundamental way. The next morning, Garrett was up with the dawn, which was unusual for him after a long cattle drive. Normally, he would have slept until noon, but he found himself restless and eager to get back to town. He tended to Rusty, fed the chickens that scratched around his cabin, and made himself presentable, even going so far as to shave and put on his good shirt. His boss, Samuel Yates, found him in the barn, saddling Rusty again. Samuel was a weathered man in his 60s who had built the Double Y from nothing and treated his hands with respect. "Heard you rode in late last night," Samuel said, leaning against a post. "Drive went well." "Yes, sir." "Got top dollar for the herd and the buyer wants more next year. I've got the paperwork in my cabin." "Good, good. But that is not why you are all spruced up and heading back to town already, is it?" Garrett felt his ears go red. "I met someone, a lady in distress. I brought her to Mrs. Potter's last night, and I wanted to check on her, make sure she is settling in all right." Samuel's weathered face creased into a knowing smile. "A lady, is it? Well, you have got your work done and then some. Take the day if you need it. Just do not forget about us out here when you go getting yourself hitched." "It is not like that," Garrett protested, but Samuel just laughed and waved him off. The ride to Jefferson seemed to take twice as long as it had the night before, though Garrett knew that was just his impatience talking. When he finally reached the Excelsior house, it was nearly 9 in the morning, and the town was bustling with activity. Wagons rattled down the street, and people called greetings to one another as they went about their business. Mrs. Potter met him at the door, looking pleased. "Mr. Young, I am glad you came. Miss Walsh has been asking about you. Come in, come in." She led him to a small parlor off the main lobby, and there sat Katherine, looking transformed from the night before. She had bathed and changed into a simple gray dress that Mrs. Potter must have lent her, and her dark hair was neatly braided and pinned. She still looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes, but there was a calmness about her that had not been there the night before. She stood when she saw him, a smile lighting up her face. "Mr. Young, you came." "I said I would," Garrett replied, suddenly feeling awkward. In the clear light of day, Katherine was even more beautiful than he had realized, and he found himself tongue-tied. "How are you feeling?" "Much better, thanks to Mrs. Potter's kindness. She has offered me a position here at the hotel, helping with the bookkeeping and the front desk. I am to have room and board plus wages, which is more generous than I could have hoped for." "That is wonderful news," Garrett said, genuinely pleased. He looked at Mrs. Potter. "Thank you for helping her." "Thank you for bringing her to me," Mrs. Potter replied. "Now I will leave you two to talk. Miss Walsh, you do not start work until tomorrow, so take the day to rest and get your bearings. Mr. Young, you make sure she gets a proper tour of Jefferson, but have her back by supper time." Before either of them could protest, Mrs. Potter swept out of the room, leaving them alone. Katherine laughed, a sound that made Garrett's heart skip. "She is quite the force of nature," Katherine said. "That she is. She runs the best hotel in East Texas and does not let anyone forget it." Garrett hesitated, then asked, "Would you like that tour? I know you must be tired, but Jefferson is a good town and you should know your way around." "I would love that," Katherine said warmly. "Let me get my bonnet." They walked through Jefferson together, Garrett pointing out the various businesses and landmarks. He showed her the courthouse, an impressive building of red brick that dominated the town square. They stopped by the general store, where Garrett introduced her to the owner, a friendly man named Mr. Patterson, who immediately offered to extend her credit until her first wages came in. At the church, they met Reverend Thompson, a kindly older man who welcomed Katherine warmly and invited her to services on Sunday. They passed the newspaper office and Katherine lingered at the window, looking at the printing press visible inside. "I love newspapers," she said. "My father used to get several from different cities, and I would read them all cover to cover. I always thought it would be exciting to work for one." "The editor is a man named John Henderson," Garrett told her. "He is always looking for contributors. Maybe you could write something for him." Katherine looked at him with surprise and delight. "Do you really think so? Why not? You are educated and well-spoken. The town could use more voices like yours." They continued their walk, ending up by the river that ran along the edge of town. It was the same river where Garrett had found Katherine the night before, though here it ran through a proper park with benches and shade trees. They sat together on one of the benches, watching the water flow by. "I still cannot quite believe this is happening," Katherine said quietly. "Yesterday I thought my life was over. I had nothing and no one, and I was so afraid. Then you appeared like something out of a story, and now I have a job and a safe place to stay and a chance to start over. It feels like a dream." "It is not a dream," Garrett assured her. "It is real, and you deserve it. What happened to you was not your fault, Katherine. You were in an impossible situation, and you were brave enough to escape. That takes courage." She turned to look at him, her green eyes searching his face. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not even know me." Garrett considered the question carefully. "I suppose because I know what it is like to need help and have someone offer it. After the war, I was lost for a long time. I drifted from place to place, doing odd jobs and not really caring about anything. Then I came to Jefferson, and Samuel Yates gave me a chance when he had no reason to. He saw something in me that I did not see in myself, and he helped me build a life here. I guess I am just trying to pass that kindness along." "You are a good man, Garrett Young," Katherine said softly, and the way she said his name made his pulse quicken. They talked until the shadows grew long, sharing more about their lives and their dreams. Garrett learned that Katherine loved music and could play the piano, though she had not touched one in months. Katherine learned that Garrett had always wanted to have his own ranch someday. Nothing huge, just enough land to raise good cattle and maybe some horses. When they finally returned to the Excelsior house, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. At the door, Katherine took off his coat, which she had been wearing again, and handed it back to him. "Thank you again," she said, "for everything." "Keep it," Garrett said impulsively. "The nights can still get cold, and I've got others." Katherine looked down at the coat in her hands, then back up at him. "I will treasure it," she promised. Over the following weeks, Garrett found himself inventing excuses to go into town more often than necessary. He would stop by the Excelsior house to drop off supplies he claimed Mrs. Potter had requested, or to pick up mail that could have waited, or simply to see if Katherine wanted to take a walk during her breaks. Katherine seemed just as eager to see him, her face always lighting up when he appeared. She settled into her new life with remarkable grace, proving herself invaluable to Mrs. Potter with her neat handwriting and head for numbers. The hotel's bookkeeping had never been in better order, and she had a way with guests that made them feel welcome and valued. She also took Garrett's suggestion and approached John Henderson at the newspaper. He was impressed by her writing sample, an essay about the importance of literacy that was both thoughtful and eloquent, and he began publishing her pieces regularly. Katherine wrote about life in Jefferson, about the changing seasons, about the people who made the town special. Her words resonated with readers, and soon people were stopping her on the street to tell her how much they enjoyed her articles. Garrett was proud of her, and he told her so often. He loved watching her confidence grow, seeing her blossom from the frightened, broken woman he had found by the river into someone who walked with her head held high. But he was also falling in love with her, and that terrified him. He had not been in love before, not really. There had been a girl back before the war, but that had been puppy love, nothing serious. What he felt for Katherine was different. It was the way his heart sped up when he saw her, the way he found himself thinking about her at odd moments during the day. It was the way she made him want to be better, to work harder, to build something lasting. He did not know if she felt the same way. She was always happy to see him, always smiled at his jokes and listened with interest when he talked about his work. But he could not tell if that was friendship or something more, and he was afraid to push for fear of driving her away. Then, about 6 weeks after he had found her, everything changed. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Garrett had taken Katherine to a social at the church. The whole town had turned out for the event, which featured food, games, and dancing. Katherine wore a new dress she had sewn herself from fabric Mr. Patterson had sold her at cost, a lovely green thing that matched her eyes. They were standing together, watching some of the younger children play a game of tag when a man approached them. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with slicked back hair and expensive clothes that marked him as someone from the city. Garrett did not recognize him, but he saw Katherine go pale. "Well, well," the man said, his voice oily with false friendliness. "Katherine Walsh, I have been looking for you." "Vernon," Katherine whispered, and Garrett felt rage surge through him. This was the man who had tried to trap her, who had made her run into the night with nothing. "You know, you caused me a lot of trouble when you ran off," Vernon Cates continued, ignoring Garrett entirely. "I had to explain to my business associates why the girl I had promised them was not available. It made me look bad, Katherine, and I do not like looking bad." "You need to leave," Garrett said, his voice hard as iron. "Miss Walsh does not want to talk to you." Vernon finally looked at him, his eyes cold and calculating. "And who are you?" "Another one of her admirers. Did she tell you about the debt she owes me?" "Room and board for 2 weeks, plus the cost of lost business. She owes me $200, Cowboy, and I mean to collect." "She owes you nothing," Garrett shot back. "You tried to force her into prostitution, which is illegal in this state. If anyone owes anything, you owe her an apology and compensation for what you put her through." Vernon's face darkened. "Those are serious accusations, friend. You might want to be careful about throwing words like that around." "Or what?" Garrett stepped forward, putting himself between Vernon and Katherine. "You will do what exactly? This is my town, and these are my people. You are not welcome here, and if you know what is good for you, you will get on the next train out of Jefferson and never come back." A crowd had started to gather, drawn by the confrontation. Garrett saw several of his friends from the Double Y, along with Samuel Yates himself. He also saw Sheriff Morrison, a competent lawman who did not tolerate trouble in his town. Vernon saw them too, and Garrett watched him recalculate his odds. "This is not over," he said finally. "I will get what I am owed one way or another." "If you come near Miss Walsh again, you will answer to me," Garrett said flatly. "And trust me when I say that is not a situation you want to find yourself in." Vernon sneered at him but backed away. He pushed through the crowd and disappeared down the street. Garrett stood rigid, watching until he was sure the man was gone before turning to Katherine. She was shaking, her face white as a sheet. Without thinking, Garrett pulled her into his arms, holding her close. She clung to him, her fingers gripping his shirt. "He found me," she whispered. "I thought I was safe, but he found me." "You are safe," Garrett promised fiercely. "I will not let him hurt you, Katherine. I swear it on my life." Sheriff Morrison approached them, his expression grim. "I saw what happened. Who was that man?" Garrett explained the situation, with Katherine adding details when she could manage to speak. The sheriff listened carefully, his face growing darker as the story unfolded. "I will have a talk with him," Morrison said when they finished. "And I will make it clear that he is not welcome in Jefferson. But Miss Walsh, I have to be honest with you. If he is determined, a man like that can cause trouble. You might want to think about taking some precautions." "What kind of precautions?" Katherine asked, her voice small. "Do not go anywhere alone, for one thing. Stick to populated areas. And maybe consider getting someone to keep an eye on your room at the hotel at night." Garrett made a decision in that moment, one that felt both reckless and absolutely right. "She can stay at my cabin," he said. "It is on the Double Y property, well away from town. Vernon would never find it, and even if he did, he would have to go through me first." "Garrett, I cannot," Katherine protested. "It would not be proper. People would talk." "Let them talk," Garrett said firmly. "Your safety is more important than gossip. We will do it right. You can have the cabin, and I will sleep in the barn. Or better yet, I will talk to Samuel. He has a spare room in the main house that he never uses. Either way, you will be safe." Mrs. Potter, who had joined the gathering crowd, spoke up. "I think that is a wise idea, Miss Walsh. And I can vouch for Mr. Young's character. He is a gentleman through and through." Katherine looked around at the faces of the people gathered, these people who had become her friends and neighbors over the past 6 weeks. She saw concern and support in their eyes, and Garrett saw her resolve strengthen. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you, Garrett. I accept your offer." That night, after the social had broken up and the excitement had died down, Garrett helped Katherine gather her few belongings from the hotel. True to his word, he spoke with Samuel, who immediately offered his spare room. The rancher's wife had passed away years ago, and he lived alone in the big house with more space than he needed. "She is welcome here as long as she needs," Samuel said, and Garrett could have hugged the old man. Katherine settled into the room, which was clean and comfortable with a big window that looked out over the ranch. Samuel treated her with grandfatherly courtesy, and Garrett made sure she had everything she needed. But the encounter with Vernon had shaken her badly. For the first few days, she jumped at every unexpected noise and had trouble sleeping. Garrett found her several times sitting on the porch in the middle of the night, staring out at the darkness. One night, about a week after she had moved to the ranch, Garrett found her there again. He had been unable to sleep himself, worried about her, and he sat down beside her on the porch steps. "Cannot sleep?" he asked gently. Katherine shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see his face. I keep thinking about what might have happened if you had not found me that night, or if I had not had the courage to run. I keep thinking about all the women who are not as lucky as I was, who are trapped in situations like the one I escaped from. You are safe now, Garrett reminded her. Vernon has not been seen in Jefferson since that day. The sheriff made sure he got on the train out of town. But there are others like him, Katherine said passionately. There are women all over this territory who are being exploited and abused, who have no one to help them. I was lucky, Garrett, I had you. But what about the ones who do not? Garrett looked at her, seeing the fire in her eyes, the determination in her set jaw. This was not just fear talking. This was conviction. What are you thinking? He asked. I am thinking I want to write about it, Katherine said. I want to tell my story, Garrett. Not all the details, but enough that other women will know they are not alone, that they can escape, that there are good people who will help them. I want to expose men like Vernon Cates for what they are. That is brave, Garrett said slowly. But it could also be dangerous. If you tell your story, Vernon might come back. Other men like him might take offense. I know, Katherine said, but I have to do it. I have to do something, or I will go mad thinking about all the suffering I could have helped prevent. Garrett reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Then I will stand with you, he said. Whatever you decide to do, I am with you. Katherine looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face. In the moonlight, her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Why? She asked softly. Why would you risk so much for me? And Garrett, who had been holding back the truth for weeks, found he could not do it anymore. Because I love you, he said simply. I have loved you since the night I found you by the river, when you looked up at me with those green eyes, and I felt my whole world shift. I love your courage and your kindness and the way you refuse to let what happened to you define who you are. I love the way you laugh and the way you think and the way you see the world. I love you, Katherine Walsh, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Katherine stared at him, her lips parted in surprise. For a long moment she did not speak, and Garrett felt his heart hammering in his chest, afraid he had overstepped, that he had ruined everything. Then she smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. I love you too, she said, her voice filled with wonder. I think I have loved you from that first night as well. You gave me your coat when I was freezing, and then you gave me so much more. You gave me hope and friendship and a reason to keep going. You made me believe that good men still exist in this world, and that I deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. I love you, Garrett Young, with all my heart. Garrett felt something break open inside him, some dam he had built around his heart years ago. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears that had started to fall down her cheeks. May I kiss you? He asked, wanting to do this right, to give her every choice. Please, Katherine whispered, and then his lips were on hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid the moment might shatter. But then Katherine wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed closer, and the kiss deepened, becoming something urgent and passionate. Garrett felt like he was drowning in her, in the taste of her lips and the feel of her body against his, and he never wanted to come up for air. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. I know it is too soon, and I know you have just started building your new life, but I want to spend every day with you. I want to wake up next to you and go to sleep holding you. I want to build a life with you, Katherine. Please say yes. Katherine laughed, a sound of pure joy. Yes, she said. Yes, 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 I will marry you, Garrett Young. Nothing would make me happier. They kissed again, and this time it was full of promise and hope for the future. When they finally went inside, hand in hand, the darkness did not seem quite so dark anymore, and the future looked brighter than it had in years. The next morning, they told Samuel, who congratulated them heartily and insisted on hosting the wedding at the ranch. Over breakfast, Katherine outlined her plan for the article she wanted to write, and both men listened with respect and admiration. "It is going to cause a stir," Samuel warned, "but it is the right thing to do. Evil flourishes in the dark, and you will be shining a light on something people would rather ignore." Katherine nodded. "I know, but I have to do it. And now I have Garrett by my side, I feel like I can do anything." She wrote the article over the next few days, and Garrett read every draft, offering suggestions and support. The final piece was powerful, a first-hand account of how predatory men exploited desperate women, told with enough specificity to be credible, but enough discretion to protect Katherine's privacy. She named Vernon Cates directly, stating facts that could be verified, and she called for stronger laws to protect women and punish those who would enslave them. John Henderson published it on the front page of the Jefferson newspaper, and as Samuel had predicted, it caused an uproar. Some people praised Katherine's courage and called for reform. Others criticized her for speaking out, saying she should have kept quiet about such indelicate matters. But the article was reprinted in newspapers across Texas, and soon Katherine was receiving letters from women thanking her for telling their story. Through it all, Garrett stayed close, his presence a constant source of strength and comfort. He dealt with the critics calmly, defending Katherine's right to speak her truth. He also kept a watchful eye out for Vernon Cates, but the man never reappeared. The sheriff told them that Vernon had left Texas entirely, his reputation ruined by Katherine's expose. They were married on a beautiful October afternoon, 6 weeks after Garrett had proposed. Katherine wore a dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Potter had helped her sew, and Garrett wore his best suit with a new tie. The ceremony took place in the garden behind the main house, with Reverend Thompson officiating and half the town in attendance. When Garrett saw Katherine walking toward him on Samuel's arm, his breath caught in his throat. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and he could not believe she was about to become his wife. They exchanged vows under an arch of autumn flowers, promising to love and cherish each other through all the days of their lives. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett kissed Katherine with all the love and passion in his heart, not caring who was watching. The reception was a joyous affair, with food and music and dancing. Garrett danced with his new wife, holding her close and marveling at his good fortune. How had he gotten so lucky? What twist of fate had led him down that particular trail on that particular evening when Katherine needed him most? "What are you thinking about?" Katherine asked, looking up at him with a smile. "I am thinking about the night I found you by the river," Garrett admitted. "I am thinking about how different our lives would be if I had taken another route home, or if I had not stopped when I heard you crying. I am thinking about how grateful I am that I did stop, because it led me to you." "I think about that night too," Katherine said softly. "I think about how alone and afraid I was, and how you changed everything just by being kind. You gave me your coat, Garrett, but you also gave me so much more. You gave me back my life. And you gave me a reason to live mine," Garrett replied. "Before you, I was just going through the motions, working and sleeping and not really thinking about the future. Now I cannot wait to see what comes next, as long as you are by my side." They kissed again, lost in each other, until someone called for the cake to be cut. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of happiness, and when it was finally over and they could retreat to the cabin that was now their home, Garrett felt like the luckiest man alive. Samuel had given Garrett a plot of land on the edge of the Double Y property as a wedding gift, along with enough lumber to build a real house. But that would come later. For now, the cabin was enough, cozy and warm and theirs. That night, as they lay together for the first time as husband and wife, Garrett held Katherine close and thanked whatever powers had brought them together. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "Today, tomorrow, and always." "And I love you," Katherine whispered back. "My cowboy who found me crying by the river and gave me everything." The next few years were the happiest of Garrett's life. He and Katherine built their house together, a sturdy structure with a wide porch and big windows that let in plenty of light. Katherine continued to write for the newspaper, expanding her topics to include everything from local politics to book reviews. She also started a small lending library in their home, collecting books and lending them out to anyone in the community who wanted to read. Garrett worked hard at the Double Y, saving every penny he could. Samuel, seeing his dedication, made him a partner in the ranch, and Garrett threw himself into the work with renewed vigor. He and Katherine began building their own herd, starting small but growing steadily. Their first child, a son they named Gabriel, was born in the summer of 1880, just shy of 2 years after their wedding. Garrett had never known such fear as he felt during Katherine's labor, pacing outside the bedroom while the midwife attended to his wife. But when he finally heard his son's first cry and was allowed into the room, seeing Katherine tired but radiant with their baby in her arms, he felt his heart expand to make room for this new love. Gabriel was a healthy, happy baby with his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Garrett was a devoted father, marveling at every milestone and spending every free moment with his son. Katherine proved to be a wonderful mother, patient and nurturing, and she managed to balance motherhood with her writing and her work with the library. 2 years later, they had a daughter, little Grace, who was the image of Katherine. And 3 years after that, another son, George, completed their family. The house that had once seemed so spacious now rang with the sound of children's laughter, and Garrett could not have been happier. He and Katherine worked side by side, building their ranch and raising their children. They expanded their herd, bought more land, and hired hands to help with the work. The ranch prospered, and so did they. But it was not just material success that made their life rich. It was the love they shared, the partnership they had built, the way they supported each other through good times and bad. When Gabriel fell from a horse and broke his arm, they comforted him together. When Grace struggled with reading, Katherine patiently taught her. When a drought threatened their herd, they made difficult decisions together about what to sell and what to keep. Through it all, they never lost sight of what had brought them together in the first place. Katherine still remembered those dark days before Garrett found her, and she made it her mission to help other women who found themselves in difficult situations. She worked with the churches in Jefferson to establish a fund for women in need, and she opened her home to more than one young woman who had nowhere else to go. Garrett supported her fully in these efforts, proud of his wife's compassion and determination. He had known from the beginning that Katherine was special, that she was someone who would make a difference in the world, and he was honored to stand beside her as she did so. Years passed, and their children grew. Gabriel proved to have a talent for working with horses and eventually took over that aspect of the ranch. Grace became a teacher, following in her mother's footsteps with her love of learning. George, the youngest, surprised everyone by becoming a lawyer, determined to use the law to protect those who could not protect themselves. Garrett and Katherine watched their children flourish with pride and joy. They had given them a good life, filled with love and security, and now they were watching them make their own marks on the world. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Garrett took Katherine back to the spot by the Rio Grande where he had first found her. It was a warm September evening, much like that fateful night so many years ago, and the river ran low and sluggish in the drought. "You remember this place?" Garrett asked, holding Katherine's hand as they stood on the bank. How could I forget? Katherine said softly. This is where my life began again. This is where you found me, crying and broken, and gave me your coat. Garrett smiled and pulled a small package from his saddlebag. I have something for you, he said, handing it to her. Katherine opened it carefully, and inside was his old leather coat, the one he had given her that first night. It was worn and faded now, carefully preserved over the years. I kept it all this time, Garrett said. It is the coat that brought us together, and I wanted you to have it, to remember that night and everything that came after. Katherine's eyes filled with tears as she held the coat, running her fingers over the familiar leather. You gave me this coat when I had nothing, she said. But more than that, you gave me your heart, your life, your name. You gave me everything, Garrett. And you gave me just as much, Garrett replied, pulling her close. You gave me love and purpose and a family. You gave me a reason to be better than I was. You gave me happiness beyond anything I ever dreamed possible. They stood together by the river as the sun set, holding each other and remembering. They thought about that scared young woman and the cowboy who had stopped to help her, and they marveled at how far they had come together. I love you, Katherine whispered, the same words she had spoken on their wedding night and 1,000 times since. And I love you, Garrett replied, his voice full of emotion. Today, tomorrow, and always. As they rode back to their ranch together, side by side as they had been for 25 years, Garrett reflected on the strange and wonderful path his life had taken. He had been a drifter once, a man without roots or purpose. Then, on a September evening by the Rio Grande, he had heard a woman crying and had made the decision to stop and help. That decision had changed everything. It had led him to Katherine, to love, to a life fuller and richer than anything he could have imagined. And all because he had given his coat to a woman in need, and in doing so, had given her his whole heart. They had many more years together after that, watching their children grow and welcoming grandchildren into their lives. The ranch continued to prosper, and they became pillars of the Jefferson community, respected and loved by all who knew them. Katherine never stopped writing, and her articles continued to inspire and challenge readers across Texas. She published 2 books, one about the exploitation of women in the frontier territories, and another about the history of Jefferson and East Texas. Both were well received, and she became known as an important voice for reform and justice. Garrett supported her in all of this, proud of everything she accomplished. But his favorite moments were still the quiet ones, the evenings when they sat together on their porch, watching the sunset and holding hands, not needing words to communicate the love that still burned as bright as it had in those early days. As they grew older, their children urged them to slow down, to let the younger generation take over more of the work. Reluctantly, they agreed, though Garrett still rode out to check on the herd most days, and Katherine still wrote her weekly column for the newspaper. One spring evening, when Garrett was in his 70s and Katherine was approaching 70, they sat together on their porch as they had done countless times before. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, their voices ringing out in the warm air, and the ranch spread out before them, prosperous and peaceful. "You ever think about that night?" Katherine asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "The night you found me by the river." "All the time," Garrett admitted. "I think about how close we came to never meeting. I think about what my life would have been like if I had not stopped that night, and I thank God every day that I did." "I was so lost that night," Katherine said quietly. "I thought my life was over. I could not see any path forward, any way out of the darkness. And then you appeared, and you were so kind. You gave me your coat and asked nothing in return. You treated me with respect when I felt like I deserved none. You showed me that there was still goodness in the world and that I was worthy of it." Garrett brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You were always worthy of it, my love. Always." They sat in silence for a while longer, listening to their grandchildren play and watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The air was sweet with the scent of the wildflowers Katherine had planted years ago, and a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the oak trees Garrett had planted when their children were young. "It has been a good life," Katherine said contentedly, "full of love and purpose and joy." "I could not have asked for more." "Neither could I," Garrett agreed. "You made me the luckiest man alive, Katherine Walsh Young. Every single day with you has been a gift." Their children and grandchildren came to join them on the porch as the evening deepened, and they sat together as a family, talking and laughing and enjoying each other's company. Looking around at the faces of those he loved, Garrett felt a profound sense of contentment and peace. He had started out as a simple cowboy, a man with few prospects and no real direction. But Katherine had changed all that. She had given him purpose and meaning, and together they had built something lasting and beautiful. Years later, when Garrett was 81 and Katherine was 78, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with a grand party at the ranch. All their children and grandchildren were there, along with half the town of Jefferson. The ranch they had built together was now one of the most successful in East Texas, and their children had taken over its day-to-day operations, allowing Garrett and Katherine to truly retire at last. The party was a joyous affair, filled with food and music and dancing. Garrett, though his joints ached and his hair was snow white, still managed to dance with his wife, holding her as carefully as if she were made of glass. "You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," he whispered in her ear as they swayed to the music. Katherine laughed, her eyes still that same remarkable green despite the lines around them. "And you are still a terrible liar," she teased, "but I love you for it anyway." "I am not lying," Garrett insisted. "You are beautiful to me, Katherine. You always have been and you always will be. From the moment I saw you by that river, crying with your heart broken, I thought you were the most beautiful thing in the world. And 50 years later, I still feel the same way." Katherine rested her head on his shoulder, and they danced slowly, lost in each other and in the memories of all the years they had shared. When the party was over and the last guest had gone home, they sat together on their porch one more time, wrapped in a quilt against the cool evening air. 50 years, Katherine marveled. "Where did the time go?" "Into building a life," Garrett replied. "Into raising our children and building our ranch and helping our community. Into loving each other and being loved in return. That is where the time went, and I would not change a single moment of it." "Neither would I," Katherine agreed. She paused, then said, "Do you still have the coat?" "The one you gave me that first night, of course," Garrett said. "It is in the trunk in our bedroom, wrapped in cloth to preserve it." "Why?" "I want to see it again," Katherine said. "I want to hold it and remember that night, remember the man who gave it to me and changed my life forever." They went inside together, moving slowly with the careful steps of the elderly. Garrett retrieved the coat from the trunk, handling it reverently. It was even more worn now, the leather cracked and faded, but to them, it was priceless. Katherine wrapped it around her shoulders, just as she had done that first night, and smiled up at her husband. "It still smells like you," she said softly. "Like leather and horses and home." Garrett pulled her close, and they stood together in their bedroom, holding each other and the coat that had brought them together so many years ago. They had several more good years together after that, years of quiet contentment and deep love. They watched their grandchildren grow and welcomed great-grandchildren into the family. They saw Jefferson continue to grow and prosper, becoming a true city with all the modern conveniences. But most importantly, they had each other. And that was all they had ever really needed. When Garrett finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 86, Katherine grieved deeply, but found comfort in the life they had built together and the love they had shared. She lived for 5 more years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her, continuing to write and read and share her wisdom with anyone who would listen. On the day she died, her family found her in her favorite chair on the porch, Garrett's old coat wrapped around her shoulders, a peaceful smile on her face. In her lap was a letter she had been writing, and the last lines read, "I was found crying by a river by a cowboy who gave me his coat and, eventually, his whole heart. And in doing so, he gave me everything. I lived a life filled with love and purpose, and I regret nothing. When I see my Garrett again, I will thank him once more for stopping that night, for choosing kindness over indifference, for loving me when I felt unlovable. He saved my life, and then he made that life worth living. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." Their children buried them side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple marker that read, "Garrett Young and Katherine Walsh Young. Beloved parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents, their love story began by a river and lasted a lifetime." And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right, the people of Jefferson swore they could see 2 figures sitting on the porch of the old Young ranch house, holding hands and watching the sunset together, just as they had done for 50 wonderful years. The ranch continued to prosper under their children's care, and the coat that had brought Garrett and Katherine together was preserved as a family heirloom, passed down through the generations along with the story of how a simple act of kindness had led to a love that transcended time itself. In the end, theirs was a story of hope and redemption, of how one person's compassion can change another person's entire world. It was a story of how love, when it is real and true, can heal even the deepest wounds and build something beautiful from the ashes of despair. And it all started with a cowboy who heard a woman crying by a river and made the choice to stop to help, to give his coat to someone in need. In doing so, he gave her far more than warmth on a cold night. He gave her hope, safety, love, and a future she never could have imagined. That coat became a symbol of everything good in the world, a reminder that kindness matters, that one person can make a difference, and that true love, when you find it, is worth holding on to with everything you have. The Young family continued to tell the story for generations, making sure that each new child knew about their great-great-grandparents and the love story that had started their family line. They told about how Garrett had found Katherine at her lowest point and had lifted her up, not with grand gestures or empty promises, but with simple, genuine kindness and respect. They told about how Katherine, despite everything she had been through, had found the courage to rebuild her life and use her experiences to help others. They told about how together, Garrett and Katherine had created something lasting, a legacy of love and compassion that continued to influence their descendants decades later. And they always made sure to show the younger generations the coat, carefully preserved in a climate-controlled case, letting them touch the worn leather and imagine that long-ago September evening when everything changed. The story of Garrett and Katherine Young became something of a legend in Jefferson, a tale that parents told their children, and that the local newspaper reprinted every year on their anniversary. It was a reminder to everyone who heard it that love could be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness could have the most profound consequences. Their great-great-grandchildren, living in a world that Garrett and Katherine could never have imagined, still felt connected to them through that story. They understood that they were the product of one man's decision to stop and help a stranger in need. And that understanding shaped how they lived their own lives, carrying forward the values of compassion and integrity that Garrett and Katherine had embodied. The ranch itself became a sort of shrine, carefully maintained by the family as a reminder of their heritage. The house where Garrett and Katherine had raised their children still stood, and their descendants gathered there for holidays and special occasions, sitting on that same porch where the couple had spent so many evenings together. And always, they told the story. They told about the cowboy who gave his coat to a woman crying by a river and ended up giving her his whole heart. They told about the love that grew from that simple act of kindness, a love that lasted 50 years and created a family that continued to grow and thrive generations later. It was a story with a happy ending, a fairy tale that happened to be true, and it gave hope to everyone who heard it. It reminded them that no matter how dark things seemed, there was always the possibility of redemption, always the chance that someone kind would come along and change everything. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when they leave this world, Garrett and Katherine Young were together still, holding hands and watching over the family they had created, proud of everything their simple love story had become.